Good morning. Good morning. I believe we're live. And let me just double check to make sure that you can see me. It says live. If there's anybody in the chat in YouTube, go ahead and hit me up. And I will know right away. It's looking live. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me. This is day 3 of the inquiry in Ottawa. It should be an interesting one because this week we're looking at a whole bunch of City of Ottawa officials, starting with the city manager and ending with the mayor. But today I'm going to start off with a nice little giggle, a bit of a summary of one of our clips from the first week. So here we go.
In your evidence, you made use of a term you referred to as microaggression. Is that right?
I believe so, multiple times.
Okay. Is microaggression, is your understanding of that it means verbal and environmental slights?
Je suis francophone, donc si vous voulez être spécifique sur les mots, va falloir.
I'm francophone, so if you want to ask me specific things about words, you're going to have to ask me in French. You're asking me a theory about how to define something. Unfortunately, my knowledge of English terminology is perhaps not sufficiently appropriate, Commissioner.
Je m'appelle Brendan.
My name is Brendan.
I think it is funny, but it's not. I am doing my very best to answer clear questions in English. You asked me a very specific question on a definition. I'm saying ask me, clarify in French, and I'm glad to specify if it is yes or no. The specificity of the nuance of a word, I'm uncomfortable in responding to your question.
What of the words that I put to you, and there's a few, so means, verbal, and environmental, and slights is confusing? Is there, which one are you confused about?
J'ai expliqué plusieurs fois.
I've already explained. Try to express this, and I've explained this to the commissioner that, to my mind, everything in the periphery of the red zone was what I would describe as being microaggressions. I could describe microaggressions to you. For example, go in front of somebody and pull their mask off. I don't know how we want to describe that as a definition, but that's an example of a microaggression. Walking into a restaurant, being asked to leave and sitting down without having the right to stay. That's another microaggression. Fighting somebody who's homeless. Beating somebody who's homeless. That's another microaggression. Another type of aggression. Making so much noise at such high volumes that you have to close down a daycare. That's another kind of aggression. That's how I've described aggressions, Commissioner. I'm not a lawyer. I don't have a background in specifics, but I'm trying to use the terminology that I can to be as specific as possible to describe what I received as information and what I was able to see.
Get him a pair of these so he can understand what I'm saying in English as well, please.
Oh, that's me.
Is that possible? Do you need this? Would you like one of these for when I question you in English, because I'm unfortunately incapable of speaking French?
And I will do my very best to answer in English, but it was a very, I don't need it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So that was a fun one. He got a little upset. Didn't want to define the word he liked to use. He kept saying microaggression. I'm not sure if many of you heard it, but there was a lot of whispering going on from the counselor beside him. She was encouraging him to, they were encouraging him to speak in French, and a little bit of coaching going on there. So I do have another video I'd like to share with you. This is from the, just give me the name here. Second, I just want to be clear. Yeah, the Canadian Constitution Foundation, and it's their summary of day 2. And I found it very interesting because she's very, very nice and making sure that she's taking it from every perspective. And I like that. I don't like anybody that takes one side, makes it aggressive, and pushes an agenda. And she does not do that. She's a lawyer and she handles it very well. So I'm going to play it for you because I found it very good, and it's a good 14 minutes while I get the other videos ready. It was a great breakdown, and I agree with basically everything she said. She gave a lot of praise to Councillor Fleury and McKinney. I don't know if it was all justified, but because we didn't hear any of their residents that didn't have trouble. We only heard from one side of their residents, which were the ones that lobbied complaints, which is valid. We should hear the complaints, but we didn't hear any of from them about any of the residents that had no problems with it, who did keep their business open, who did have record sales. So even though we heard a lot from those witnesses about the grievances of the residents, we didn't get to hear any of the support that Ottawa itself was giving to the convoy and the protester as well. Would have liked to have heard about more of that. And it looks like I did manage to get the stream this time because I can actually hear it. So let me go and put it on screen. Actually, I'm going to take your moment. I'm going to show the first witness that we're expecting here today. So Steve, okay, I don't know if I can pronounce that. Kanalakos. We'll call him Steve. He's the city manager for the city of Ottawa, and he's expected to be the first witness at the public hearing. And I suspect we're going to hear about logistic issues, complaint issues, frustration with coordinating with the police and authorities and the various levels. I'm sure he's going to be talking about resources, how there was a lack of resources. I'm sure he's going to be talking about how bylaw was overwhelmed. They were having trouble keeping up with ticketing. I'm sure we'll hear from him about how logistically it was going to be difficult to move the trucks, or as Councillor Fleury likes to refer to them, the weapons, off the streets. And I'm sure that we're going to hear from him how the staff was stretched to their limits and working hard the entire time. Because all of that would be valid. That would be exactly what we would expect to happen during a protest, even a peaceful one. All of those things would be true. The resources of the city of Ottawa would be stretched and would be utilized. And quite frankly, let me just be blunt about this. That's what the taxes are for. That's their job. And they're also the nation's capital, which does mean we have our national libraries and museums and all the good stuff that Canadian taxpayers pay in order to be very proud of our country. We situate that in Ottawa, and the residents get to benefit from that and enjoy that for most of the time when there is no discord going on. And for that, the nation says thank you to the residents. And this is basically a gift. You have the nation's capital, you got the art galleries, you got the national science, you got everything there. Please enjoy it. But however, from time to time, when Canadians need to express their views about their opinions, they're going to be doing that at the nation's capital when it involves the federal government. And if the issue becomes large enough, nationwide enough, and the response from the government is compelling people to really get louder, well, then you're going to get a lot of people in Ottawa that are not pleased with what's going on and they want to voice their opinion. So, Steve, I'm sure you're going to have a lot of valid things to say. You're going to represent your position, your logistics, your team. You're going to represent even the complications and frustrations that you were having with coordinating with the federal, provincial, and other police forces. So we're going to probably hear a bunch of that testimony, and it will be valid. Now, on the cross, I'm sure we're going to hear things like, did you overreact? Because having all resources centralized into one area that really didn't need it, because there was no violence, it was a bunch of trucks, parked trucks. So did he maybe mismanage the situation? We heard testimony yesterday that we could... yeah, sorry, there's just some audio kicking in. We heard testimony yesterday that we could expect the bylaw was ticketing vehicles differently. So if it had a flag on it that they would refer to as part of the convoy, they would leave it. If it was an abandoned car or a truck, they would leave it. But if it was any other vehicle or a resident or tourist, then they would ticket or tow. So Steve may have to address on cross, why is it that his team was treating bylaw and bylaw enforcement differently based on whether or not they believed it was associated with the truckers' convoy or the protesting. I think that's important, because if the city created a situation where they really weren't enforcing by choice the various complaints and tickets and violations, if the city chose not to, well, that could have created and compounded the situation even more as far as the residents are concerned. Because we heard lots of testimony yesterday that the residents were frustrated with the lack of action. But we also heard testimony yesterday from the same people that the lack of action was choices made by city bylaw. So I think Steve should maybe answer some of those questions. Why is it a choice of the city not to enforce when they could have? And was that because they didn't have the resources? Or was that because they kind of wanted this thing to get more and more frustrating for their residents? It kind of seems like the situation was growing, not by the protesters. It's not the protesters' job to enforce any bylaw. It's just their job to not become criminal or violent or cause a reason for the police to actually get involved. There was a lot of Twitter this last day or so about the difference between violations, bylaws, civil law, criminal law, quasi-law, because the common message I'm hearing from the residents who are frustrated was the police didn't do anything. But we need to understand that the police have limited power and jurisdiction. Just because you're not happy with something doesn't make it a police matter. And just because there's a bylaw doesn't make it a police matter. In fact, that would be the bylaw officers specifically. They're the ones that have the jurisdiction of bylaws and enforcement, ticketing, not the police. We heard a lot of testimony yesterday that the frustration that the police wouldn't do anything, but however they responded and investigated the egg throwing. Well, let's look at this reasonably. The egg throwing is an assault on the vehicle. Assault is a crime. It's also vandalism. It's disobedience. It's disorderly. There are several laws and violations that contradicts or contravenes. So I'm not surprised to hear that the police did investigate an actual potential crime, which would have been the egg throwing. I think what these people are missing, because they were frustrated at the time, was it's not the police's job to make you happy. It's not the police's job to address every concern you have. They're there to serve and protect, and that's a very important thing to distinguish: serve and protect. You're not being protected because you're frustrated with illegal parking. So I think what we need to start to learn, and I'm going to see a lot of this come out the next couple of weeks, because there's a lot of police officers and officials taking a stand, and I'm sure under cross it's going to be addressed, the difference between criminal law, police actionable items, and civil disobedience, and even civil matters. For example, if you were hurt by something and there was some sort of pain and suffering, well, then there's civil means that you can do. You can file suits, lawsuits, as Zexi Lee has done. There is a class action lawsuit. So being frustrated with the police because there was a bunch of trucks that were noisy doesn't mean the police failed, and it also doesn't mean that they allowed it. That's another word that I saw and heard a lot. I saw a lot on Twitter, heard a lot in the testimony about what should be allowed. The truck shouldn't be allowed to be there in the first place. People are forgetting these are public roads and trucks are important. They also bring the food to us. So not sure why people think that trucks shouldn't be on the road. And parking infractions are not criminal. Unless you fight somebody or you actually commit an assault, there's nothing criminal about illegally parking. So as far as the police are concerned, it's not really their job. Let me take a quick look here at the witnesses we're expecting. So as I mentioned, we got Steve. Looks like he's coming first. And these are the witnesses we're expecting for this entire week. So as we see here, it looks like they're going to be starting off with the city of Ottawa, including the mayor. And we'll be seeing testimony and hearing testimony from the Ottawa Police Services. Now, if you paid close attention to day 2, The counselors gave a lot of testimony, and the BIA members gave a lot of testimony. Oh, it looks like it's starting. All right. Well, that was an excellent beginning. I'm not sure that we had any surprises there. Kind of came out what we were expecting. There's going to be a lot of finger pointing, a lot of blaming, a lot of talking about what could and couldn't be done with the current tools. We heard a lot of stuff about the convoy meeting and just looking to talk, but whether it was a quid pro quo or the city would like something in return, even to meet with them, and then establishing that as a bad precedence. I don't like that. I don't like that. I think government is supposed to listen to the people, grievances or not, whether they agree with them or not, they should be listening. Just like the first day two, we heard the entire day was about grievances from residents and businesses and counselors. Grievances are important, whether you agree with listening to them or not. I think the government definitely should have been at least entertaining the process of a democratic society, which is to get feedback from your citizens at all times. I am not suggesting that the truckers or the convoys should have received their demands or anything like that. I'm also not suggesting that the demands and all of them were coordinated or respected by everybody, but I also don't think that the government should have ignored it completely. We have a comment here from Peter. It says, logistically impossible in Wellington to empty Wellington. Sure, yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure if you got a permit to do a movie and you wanted to book that road, it would also be difficult too. It's a public road. It should be open and people should be able to use it. And if they're parked illegally and need to be towed or need to be ticketed, well, then that's the proper way to do it by law enforcement. But to try to make it political and say, well, because they're breaking bylaws, therefore everybody needs to now push against them and we need to escalate this up the chain, I don't think that was reasonable at all. Let me take a look here at a chat. How is it sounding so far to you so far? Well, I think the government's failing miserably. I think what they need to do is show that under existing laws, under existing resources, and under existing circumstances, it needs to rise to a high enough level that it has to give justification for invoking the Emergencies Act. We got to remember the entire purpose of this entire process that we're going through right now for 6 weeks is to answer just one question, just one. Did they have enough to invoke the Emergency Act? In my mind, what we should be examining and all we really need, we don't need all of these witnesses, we should just be looking at the package that was provided to the Senate for their approval on invoking and continuing with the Emergency Act. Everything that should have been applicable at that day should be in that package. All the information, everything that they were relying upon should be in that package. And quite frankly, that's all I need. If the Senate's package is convincing, great. It stands on its own 2 feet. And I think Canada could be compelled into understanding where the government stood on that. But if the Senate package is incomplete, meaning there's a lot of speculation, there was a lot of, we're assuming that if allowed to continue, it will turn into massive problem. And those are the kind of things that do not rise to the requirement in order to invoke the Emergency Act. You got to remember, the Emergency Act is really meant for severe attacks on the government where, if not but for the Emergency Act, we will have no chance to recover from it. And that's simply not the case here. Even if the truckers were completely successful in barricading the entire city of Ottawa, which is some of the testimony we heard today, that they were using that speculation to build their response to, even if they were, is that a national emergency? Does Canada stop? Even if our elected officials have a hard time getting to the parliament to chat, is that really the end of our democracy? I don't think so. And nor did it even come close to that. So what we've been going to be looking forward to, I think, this afternoon, and hopefully we can get to it with this witness, is Brendan Miller's cross of him. Because Brendan is going to be very precise in trying to establish whether or not the elements of the Emergency Act were met. he doesn't really care, nor should he care. Well, maybe that was a little harsh. Maybe he cares, but he shouldn't really be focused on complaints and grievances and business interruptions, because those are all handled under current laws and civil mechanisms like courts and suing. And so I don't think he's going to spend a lot of time on addressing things that were already covered by existing laws. What his focus will be on is trying to identify, and he's going to successfully be able to show that it doesn't exist, are the elements that are required in order to execute the Emergency Act. So I think that's going to be lacking, and I think that's where he's going to go this afternoon, if he gets a chance this afternoon, or possibly tomorrow, depending on how long these go. He's going to be going for that. So he's going to be trying to find out whether or not the city, the manager, from his perspective, even though his hands are tied and he's got bureaucratic red tape all around him, whether or not it was truly a situation where there were no existing laws. And what we've heard several times from him, and we also heard it on day 2, was political options. And we're going to hear this from Slowly as well, ex-police chief Slowly. There was a desire, at least with a subgroup of the officials responding to this, to have a conversation and possibly a resolution. You don't have to give up mandates. You don't have to give up what you think you're doing. But you sure have to talk to them and at least give them the understanding that they're not being shut out of the conversation and their grievances are heard, much like we're hearing today about the grievances of the residents of Ottawa and their officials. Is the judge that ordered that the protest was legal called right to stand? I don't think so. And I don't think we need to, because the inquiry is more about whether or not the government can establish their burden. Keep in mind, the burden is on the government. That's the whole purpose of this inquiry. And it's why it was added into the Emergency Act itself, because we need to give the government enough flexibility in what they determine to be in an emergency, and then be able to strike first and then answer questions later. And, you know, I think deep down, all of us do believe that that might be the right way to do this, because we don't want our government itself to have handcuffs and restrict them from responding in situations that are unprecedented, immediate, unknown. We do want them to have those abilities, but what we got to make sure of is they're not using them inappropriately, and they're not using them as tools to quash protest, counter opinion, opposition. That's very dangerous. At no point should we be allowing us standing idly by while our government's using government powers to quash opposition in any way. Of course, the exception to that would be national or foreign states who are doing that to us. But within Canada and Canadians, they've only named Canadians so far, people who had the intent to talk, and then the people who had the stubbornness and the right to protest. That's exactly what they did. Yeah, no, we're going to see a lot more information come out. We're going to spend 6 weeks of hearing excuses, finger pointing, and with the intent to justify overall that at the end, given all the information and the situation at the time, that Justin Trudeau's team, his cabinet, his party did the right thing here. And, you know, the burden is on them. So they're going to have to prove it. We don't have to prove that they didn't. And that's really not the job of the opposition during this inquiry. Every member of the opposition, whether it's a civil liberties union or the representative for the provinces themselves, because even Alberta and Saskatchewan have standing in this one, they're all going to be talking and asking questions and trying to find out the information on whether or not this did rise to that level and whether or not the government did the right things during it. For example, when the provinces speak, one thing that we do know was they weren't consulted. They were told. We heard that during day one when they came out and gave their opening statements, that both provinces confirmed that it was a direction. It wasn't a consultation. And the Emergency Act requires a consultation. And again, I want to highlight, it doesn't require unanimous consent. It just requires consultation. The same thing that didn't happen with the truckers was the government should have at least spoken with and consulted with. It doesn't mean they had to take direction, but it certainly meant that they had to consult. So they didn't consult with the provinces. They didn't consult with the protesters, the convoy organizers. And it even seems like the federal government didn't even consult much with municipalities and municipal authorities and officials as well. I don't think half his party was involved. You might be referring to a famous quote that we've heard many times out of a European leader. Yeah, half the cabinet goes by drumbeat. So as we saw during this, we did have one member of the Liberal Party and possibly others that might have been less comfortable with speaking publicly. I want to say Lightfoot came out, Joel Lightfoot. Someone hit me in a text. I'm very bad with remembering some names. But he came out very passionately against. But you'll also remember, if you check the record, he voted for. So we have a system in this country where we have what's called whips, and their purpose, if you look this up, that's still their name, is to ensure that people like Joel, who are against the leadership's desires, steps in line. And how does that happen? Well, coercion, duress. They can lose their seat. They could be replaced. They will not have support in the next election. They'll be publicly shamed. They'll be thrown out of the party. We've seen this happen. And yeah, quite frankly, whether or not you want to acknowledge it and accept it, your government uses tools and the parties uses tools in order to coerce and get things done. You'll hear the term tools, tool set, toolbox. You'll hear things like that a lot during this entire inquiry, because that's exactly how they think. They don't think about right and wrong, should, shouldn't. They think about tools available. And when you're a hammer in search of a nail, you can hit somebody and hurt somebody. So, you know, people in power sometimes want to take the biggest tool they got in order to address a problem as quickly as they want. Doesn't mean it's appropriate or necessary or even legal. So we're going to find out over time whether or not. Lightbound, thank you very much. Yes, I always say foot. Thank you very much, Barbara. Lightbound. Yeah, Joel Lightbound, a Liberal MP done. He did come out. He was very passionate about it. We were all very surprised, but we weren't surprised to see him vote for, along with the NDP party, the Green Party. So yeah, that's called a whip. And if you're in a party and you're an MP, you have very little actual independence and very little actual power to represent, because it's a party's mandate platform, and the whip will ensure that you play by their rules, not necessarily Canada's rules. He'll be gone soon, Portugal. Oh, yeah. Well, here, Joel, if you're out there and listening, go independent. You would have a ton of respect, okay? Because independent is a tough road. It's a very tough road. You actually have to be completely honest and upfront, and you just have to be that way. There's no other ways to become electable as an independent without your credibility and without your ability to actually provide representation. But Joel, you stood up against a massively strong party, well entrenched in the Quebec area and well entrenched in your riding. But I also think people would respect it. So consider running as an independent, and don't treat it like it's a downgrade. It's actually an upgrade. If you can be a successful independent, you actually have a little bit more power as an MP, because you're not whipped and you don't have a platform and you are flexible. Okay, I'm going to jump back to the audio here as soon as I hear it. But until then, we can see a bunch of empty seats. That's something I wish I didn't see. I wish that was packed. All right. When you're a hammer, everything is a nail. That's so true. And yeah, we hear that a lot. A hammer in search of a nail, and then people will get hurt. That's why I would prefer that they weren't using tool sets as their mindset, but they were turning to tools when necessary after they determined it necessary. But we'll see what else comes out, because, oh, I got some audio. Hold on a second. Well, there you have it. There's the morning. One witness. We're still making our way through it. Just starting the cross. And as you can see with that last cross, they're trying to establish whether or not they had Sully No, sorry, I'm going to go back to Solly's representative, whether or not Solly did everything he could and whether or not there was a political solution. And then we heard from a representative of the businesses and residents again. And that was a fiery exchange because he was really trying to put a bunch of words into city manager's mouth and try and make it seem like it was a lot worse than it was. For example, on day 2 and day 1, we heard a lot about the fire truck blocked to the hotel multiple times from the same counselor here, same representative, about that fire truck being blocked. But now we find out the truth. A fire truck was blocked, but they have multiple routes. That particular call was addressed, but he was harmed. There was no concern. So you can see how they're pulling out the narrative and they're trying to make things seem a lot worse than they truly, truly are. But here, this is what the inquiry is for. We do want to hear their side. We do want to understand where they're going with this. And we want to make sure that we hear all the details. And I thought that was a wonderful way to get some of the information to come out when one of the representatives was trying to push a narrative that didn't exist. The fire truck was blocked and people were put at risk. Didn't happen. And what we also didn't happen or hear was any other situations. Was there an ambulance that they could talk about? Was there another fire truck? No, we're hearing about one. The truth is what we heard. The cities are designed, and the city manager's job is to ensure that the city keeps functioning, even in situations like this. And Ottawa in particular is a city that is used to dealing with mass problems like snowstorms. Snowstorms will shut down an entire city where hospitals and fire trucks and ambulances have difficulties. So Ottawa in particular is very good at rerouting, opening up arteries, and making sure that people can get where they need to get when it comes to their services. So as we saw the manager explain here a few times, they did their job to the most part, and the narrative that the system was crumbling, the services was crumbling, emergency services were unavailable is just a narrative that actually didn't happen. What we also didn't hear out of the city manager was why we need the Emergency Act to be invoked. There was talk about not getting a meeting with the mayor and the convoy because they didn't have enough terms, something like that. He used the term terms. They didn't have terms to justify a meeting with the mayor. He also talked about the provincial leaders not responding, treating it like it was no big deal. Now, when you think about it, there could be 2 reasons for that. One, they don't care. Well, I don't think that's the case. 2, there was nothing really to respond to. This was just an event that was noisy and lots of trucks, but nothing illegal. Protests are allowed, and it's democracy at work. So the province's response would have been more aligned with the law on what they could do. And then the last point I want to make on this particular witness at this stage was, I don't think he's taken a side. I think he's trying to be as impartial as possible. I didn't hear him embellishing. I didn't hear him exaggerating. I didn't hear him do any of that. So that's good news, because if this is a testimony to the type of witnesses we're going to hear, I believe what we're going to hear is the problem kept moving up the levels, and people tried to use the tools available to them until they ran out. There were no more tools available, and there were no more levels to go up. So that's when the federal government decided to bring out the biggest tool possible. Now, it doesn't mean that they can do that. They should have done that, nor is it going to mean that they're going to be able to do that in the future. But that's what we're going to find out here today. So there was a question at the end here from Wayne about perjury, people lying on the stand, and what can happen here. All right. So the dirty little secret of our legal system is that's something that's not prosecuted enough. Perjury is not prosecuted enough. Small claims court, civil court, Supreme Court, all over the place. It's really not prosecuted enough. If the witness that's lying is from the other side, you'll see it more often. So if we see a witness come on here and the government believes that they were lying, and it wasn't helping the government's position, well, then you might actually see some threats of perjury and charges and stuff like that. But when it comes to government officials, they have, I don't want to say this unspoken rule, but they kind of have this blanket of they need to be able to say whatever they need to say without the fear of prosecution and retaliation. That's important when it comes to civil service, because you want to be able to be as upfront and honest as possible without the threat of retaliation and legal course. There are limits to that. Okay, there are limits to that. Gross misconduct, gross lying, egregious lying, those are all limits. You can't go overboard with it, but it kind of gives them the ability to have honest mistakes, doing their best, and when it's done under goodwill, then usually it's overlooked. It's not something that would be chargeable. Once you take an oath, though, to tell the truth, swear on the Bible, the Quran, or an alternative, which is what they're all being offered when they take the stand, then there's an actual legal requirement to be as truthful as you can be. And when I say can be, we all know humans are the worst witnesses. This is something that we were taught in law school. Humans are the worst witnesses because we're fallible. We're not perfect. Our memories have a tendency of filling in the blanks, especially when under pressure, we feel compelled to give an answer. And when we get into that mindset, sometimes in no malicious reasons, you will fill in the blanks. Your brain will fill in the blanks. So witness testimony is usually the least reliable testimony you can get, or evidence you can get, because humans are fallible and we understand that. Again, with like everything else in the law, there's the reasonableness test. So is it reasonable? So that means if you make a mistake and there's gross results to it, well, you might be held accountable for it. But if your lie is not simply just misunderstood, you just outright trying to lie and trying to hide something and be deceitful, well then, yeah, of course, that can be elevated to perjury. And if that does happen, it's interesting how the process is. You have to have the crown, the King's Court will have to lay the charges, likely the federal government's level, because this is a federal inquiry. So somebody within the federal government, the King's bench or the King's representative, will have to levy the charge. Say this person is guilty or is charged with perjury, and then go through a trial and a judgment on that. It's very rare. It's very rare to even see that in these kind of inquiries, unless it's very gross and frivolous, and it's definitely going to be impactful to the material evidence of this particular matter. We did hear lying because we have to have. We've heard contradicting statements, so you can't have two statements that contradict each other be true. So, for example, did the hotel not receive fire services? On day 1, day 2, we heard they did not. Day 3, we heard they do. So was day 1 an embellishment, and is an embellishment a lie? And one more thing I want to point out is we're hearing testimony from two sides of the microphone here. We're hearing testimony from people that are sworn in witnesses, and we're also hearing testimony from people asking the questions. So we're getting really long leading questions, which provide a lot of testimony in it. And nobody's objecting to that. And the people standing up to represent are not under oath the same way the witness is. So we are hearing a lot of evidence come into this inquiry through the question asking side of things, and that's not under oath. So everybody should be clear when a representative says something in the form of a question. It doesn't make it true. It doesn't make it evidence. And quite frankly, it's not even challengeable. So you should only really be paying attention to the statements from the witnesses, because that's what the inquiry should only be recording as evidence and testimony, not the questions. But the exception or so to that would be when the question is leading and the answer is yes or no, then the question itself becomes part of the testimony. So this is something I'm not seeing objections on. I'm not seeing the commission itself cracking down on. The commissioner himself, he's not cracking down on any of this. He's not objecting, and he's not reminding people to just stick to the facts. We also want to let everybody know that there is a representative legal representation for the committee itself. So every once in a while, we heard someone speak up about evidence not being displayed and whether or not it should be displayed and whether or not they had leave. Well, those two people there, they represent the committee itself. So the committee itself has legal representation as well to ensure likely that they're playing by the rules. Everybody's being fair, and ensure that the process goes forward smoothly, because we really don't want to have the process itself challenged for procedural issues, hiccups, something that don't go right, because that can make the whole event itself be unnecessary, or at least in some people's eyes, it will lose credibility. So if there's some sort of hiccup on a procedure, and then there's a result or a report, there'll be a group of people that will dismiss it for that reason alone. All right, Freedom Convoy. Peter, I'm not sure what that's in reference to, but cool. Oh my gosh, it sounds so different hearing King's Court. Yeah, the King's Bench, King's Court. Yeah, we heard that a couple times too in by representatives today as well, because our Queen's gone. So King's Court. Oh, fake calls. Maybe you're talking about the 911 and the 311 calls that they're referring to. Even then, that wouldn't be an Emergency Act level incident. And of course, I remember that the news coming out at the time, they were even complaining that a lot of the calls were coming from outside of Canada. So whether or not there was some influence to complicate it or make it seem worse, or to just interject confusion, that could be possible. I really don't think that it came from the convoy or the protesters, because it wouldn't be a benefit to them. There would be zero value in the protesters and the convoy themselves interrupting anything. In fact, I think they were probably going to be extra cautious not to inconvenience and cause issues with services, for the very reason that it would then be used against them in the future or at the time in order to stop the protest. So I don't think you'll have any evidence that it actually came from protesters or the convoy, even though the 911 phone system and our entire national phone system is auditable. So with subpoenas, you can find out who made calls where. So if they really were interested in who were doing the 911 and the 311 blocking, a couple of subpoenas will get that information, and they can go ahead and take action. We haven't seen that in 8 months, so I'm not going to presume that there isn't going to be some sort of action around that. However, logic and common sense would dictate that if that was a material issue, it would have been prepared for this hearing, and we would have heard it during this inquiry. So let's stay patient on that one. We might hear in the future. Here's 911 calls. Here are the records, and they all came from one house in Alberta. Or we'll hear nothing about it. If there's any other questions, feel free to throw it into the chat, and I'll be happy to address them. But for now, what I'm going to do is go ahead and queue up a video I did with the organization, Students Against Mandates. I know I played this video last time, but now I'm going to play the full video so you can actually see more of the content. And it's a great video. So this group was fighting very hard, and still are fighting very hard, in order to ensure that students' voices are heard. The student environment is an educational one. And if you pay attention to what these two have to say, our future is actually in good hands. These are two very bright young students, some of the best I've met, but I do meet a lot of great students in Canada. So for a little bit of inspiration while we're sitting here wallowing in on Ottawa's sorrows, here's a little bit of something to look forward to with the students of Manitoba. Actually, they're in Manitoba. So let me go ahead and get this queued up for you. And I hope you're enjoying this call, this stream. If you have any recommendations for me, feel free to throw it in. I'm happy to learn and get better at this. For example, I'm leaving my little window up so that you know I'm here. If there's any reactions, I'm here. But if you prefer not to see my mug, just say so, and I'll consider hiding myself from time to time. But in the meantime, I would love to share this video with you. And I'm going to run and grab at lunch so that I don't need a break during the second half. So enjoy this video, throw your comments in, and I'll live chat with you when I get back. Thank you all very much, and we'll talk to you soon. Well, yeah, and that was about a month ago, before it got changed to October 13th, and we were talking about it back then. But as you could hear from Sam, nobody else was talking about it. You didn't really hear about it, and that was kind of still true today. We are very quiet on this particular subject, but thankfully, you're all listening today. You're in here. You're not going to be the ones that didn't hear about it. You're getting You're getting this information right from the source. So thank you very much for joining me. I just finished having my lunch. I'm trying to catch up on a few tweets and stuff. So if there's a message or two that I've missed, I apologize. I'll get back to you shortly. And to everybody that's on YouTube, thank you for staying. We did lose the LinkedIn stream. So hopefully you moved over here from LinkedIn. It looks like it's a 4-hour limit on LinkedIn. And if you're on Facebook watching and listening, there's an 8-hour limit. And we do expect that this could run more than that on any of these days. So if that does happen to you and you do lose the stream, first, give Mark Zuckerberg a call and say, hey, make it longer. And then jump over to Rumble or YouTube, and I'll be finishing up the stream there. And may as well give me a subscribe on one of those platforms. You'll get notified as things are coming out. And I'll continue to bring it to you as I have it. Now, there was some breaking news. The CDC, let me just put that banner back up, because the CDC has now received a court order that they need to release a bunch of information. The 18 million vaccine injuries in America, I'm not quite sure where that number came from, but it's been used as part of the order in some way. So who knows, that narrative, I don't want to say the narrative may be crumbling, because what we're looking for at this stage now is just truth. We're looking for information and truth. And any information that's withheld or held back is something I'm interested in finding out about, because it's information that exists. And typically information that exists will have some value to it. And if it's being hidden, then it may have a lot of value to it. So we're going to keep an eye on that one. And let me go back to comments. Thank you very much to Prairie. I believe you said you were in Saskatchewan this morning representing. Nice to have you. I spent a lot of time in Saskatchewan, Saskatoon area. It's where most of my youth was. And hello again, Peter. Nice to see you again. And Wayne, of course, from the UK. Peter, go ahead and let us know whereabouts in Canada you are. You don't have to disclose exactly where you are. Don't dox yourself, but go ahead and say, hey, I'm from this neck of the woods. You know who else we had? We had Barbara at one point correct me, thankfully, on Light Bound, not Lightfoot, Joel Light Bound. And hello on Facebook as well, Sholondol Smith. Thank you very much. You're keeping us alive on Facebook with your comments, and I appreciate that. And that's about all of them. So if you're around and you have an account on Facebook or YouTube and you want to leave a comment, go ahead. If you're on Twitter, quote tweet, retweet, give me a comment there, give me a like, and let me know how it's going. And, I'm not embarrassed about critiques. So let me know if I can improve anything. Is my audio good? Do you want it up or down? Do let me know. I am learning as we go along. This is day 3. And hopefully by day 30, you'll be very pleased with what we've got going on here. All right. So we got the audio. And looks like we got the high definition stream. So all evidence will be able to see it again this time. And I do want to thank the commission, my apologies, for providing this stream. This is kind of new in Canadian politics, where we're getting a full, apparently unfettered access. We have some audio, and I don't know if that mask is required, but everybody's got a personal choice. All right. Okay, yeah, we're going to be getting some audio soon here. And everybody else, Peter and all, if you want to just let us know where you're at, and we'll say hi. And we should have the convoy doing the cross probably next, maybe next. Hopefully they got their technical issues. It sounded like there was trouble with finding documents in what they call the evidence database. There was one particular document, which was a text message, which they attempted to bring up and present, but unfortunately they were unable to. And that could also be related to why the convoy representation wasn't ready yet to take their time, their allotted time, because it was related to being able to get access to some evidence. My understanding is before everything started, everybody was asked to present and provide their evidence. It was put into a database, assigned a bunch of codes. Some of the numbers, apparently they were anticipating 10 million pieces of evidence because you got 7 zeros and then the number. So that would be a tremendous amount of anticipated numbering. But here we go. Looks like we got the justice back and audio's back. All right, enjoy. All right. Well, I hope, well, I don't have plans for tonight, so I'm going to be here for a while. It sounds like I'm going. I think our chat is more interesting than the testimony at this point, but I have been paying attention to both, and I'm starting to think that my hunch is that they're going to make an onion with a bunch of layers of incompetency might be where they're headed with this, because one of the invocation requirements is kind of like a collapse of government and then an event that made it so difficult that government cannot continue. So that might be where they're trying to head with this. I don't think it's going to work. I think incompetence is not a valid reason for the Emergency Act. If anything, what they're doing is they're exposing that they're not very good at what they're doing here. Interesting testimony from the Chief of Staff. I found a lot of, I want to be frank with this. I'm not liking the handling that they're admitting to, how much handling there is with access to the mayor. I want to remind a lot of people that people like the Chief of Staff who control access to the mayor is a non-elected position. This would be staff. This is going to be somebody that likely is there for multiple mayors. When you see people like the city manager talking about 37 years of experience, not one of those years is voted. Every single year is he's just maintaining his job. He's doing good work, getting advanced and promoted, but that would be staff. Jim, the elected official, the mayor, it appears that access to him is very controlled and they use it for negotiating purposes. And I don't understand why that seems to be so blasé. Like it's just the way it is and we should be okay with that. I'm not okay with that at all. I think access to the leaders is paramount for democracy. I think leaders being able to respond to the public they represent is paramount. I don't think at any point it should be controlled or used as bargaining chips for any event. That might be just me, though. Anybody else feel the same way, that access to our leaders should be unimpeded and we should be able to get responses out of them? Or maybe it's just me. But I do think that as we hear this testimony that the convoy wanted to meet with the mayor, but they were required to jump through some hoops, give concessions on their side, validate those concessions, follow through with those concessions, prove those concessions. And then when the data didn't come in confirming those concessions, because as we heard, data is coming from different places and it's wrong, they didn't fulfill the meeting. And it's quite possible that a couple meetings up the chain would have ended all of this, because at the end of the day, the protesters wanted to be heard. And during this inquiry, they might get heard, but this will be the first time. I think Justin Trudeau is going to be confronted with a representative from the convoy. And this, I think, is 10 months too late or 8 months too late. Heck yeah, they work for us. So let me go through some of these comments. We have a very active user, Roger. And Roger, look, I'm going to try and get you a link as soon as I can. If you're on Twitter and you DM me there, I can get it to you quickly. But you definitely had a lot of good comments, and I'd like to chat with you live on the stream at the end of this broadcast today. Heck yeah, they work for us. Or they're supposed to and not against us. Well, here's the thing about government, Prairie. Government is a collection of our neighbors. It's made up of the people we know and live with. It's the leaders that I have some issues with, because they're the ones that, for the most part, run the show. Party platforms, they're pushing from leadership down. So it becomes a little bit difficult, I think, sometimes for proper representation to happen when you have a party system that embraces whips and party platform. Shameless plug here. I'm an independent politician. I'm running for the next election. I turned down the PPC. They've offered graciously a few times, and good party, they're going places, but it won't be a fit for me because I think that we can, oh, you can drop, okay, I can't put the link in chat, but I'll find a way to get it to you, Roger. Yeah, sorry for the distraction there. We can read pre-broadcasts before and during laying out. Sure, I'm not sure where you're going with that, Roger, but when we chat a little bit later, we can do that. You know what, Prairie? Shall we give it a shot? If I give the link here, am I going to get a whole whack of people showing up? And if you do show up and I put you on stream, let's try to keep it clean. I don't want to be kicked off of YouTube. Things are just starting to go pretty good. So here's the link. And Prairie, if you want to join, jump on as well. Roger, go ahead and grab it. And maybe we'll get some of this chat to move on to the stream itself. And if anybody wants to let me know how the audio has been going, I've been following it as well. It seems all right, but if I can make any adjustments, I will do so. And reminder, so clear your calendar for tomorrow because it looks like we're going to have Mayor Jim Watson probably for most of the day. It could be a good chunk of the day because he's had his city manager and now his chief of staff testify. And I'm sure there's a lot of questions for Jim specifically around what we've heard so far. So that will be starting, the stream will be starting at 9 a.m. Eastern time, 7 a.m. where I'm at in Alberta. And the actual inquiry will start at 9:30 Eastern time, 7:30 here in Alberta. But I'll have something at the beginning where we kind of get warmed up. We'll have a coffee. We'll make sure that the technology is holding up and all that stuff. Making chili right now, but thank you. Oh, Prairie, you didn't have to tell us that. I'm getting hungry. It is it's going to be a long day for us. But as we just heard from the commissioner, and as we established in the chat, it's actually not a judge or a justice, but it's a commissioner in this context. It's looking like it's going to run late. And what I suspect he's trying to do is finish up with this witness. So this witness does not have to come back tomorrow. And that would be, you know, just common courtesy, which would mean first thing in the morning will be Mayor Jim Watson. And that should be a good one. Audio is great so far. Well, thank you very much, Prairie. Feedback's great. I like to hear if I need to make improvements. So thank you very much, Prairie, for confirming and sounding good. I also want to point out that, hey, thank you very much. This is clearly by far my most successful live stream so far, being the third one. I didn't have a high bar to cross over, but here we are. I am doing quite well on this stream. And I will take a quick moment and share with you something else. One of my videos is going viral as we're doing this. I've never had a video go over a couple hundred, but we're over a couple thousand already in the last hour. So let me show you which video it is, because quite frankly, he deserves it. It is the Brendan Miller Day 1. And let's replay that for you all so you can remember what it was he opened his statements with for this particular inquiry. Sorry about that audio. I got a complaint. It's too loud. So here we go.
And I think next we should hear from the convoy organizers who are also involved in the proceedings of the commission.
For sure, Prairie. We'll see Jim tomorrow.
Good morning. My name is Brendan Miller of Foster LLP, and I am counsel to Freedom Corp, which is an organization that represents the protesters of which attended Ottawa in January and February of 2022. My colleague, Ms. Bathsheba Vandenberg of Foster LLP, is my co-counsel on this matter, as well as the solicitors of record, both Mr. Keith Wilson, King's Counsel, as well as Ms. Eva Chipiuk, who is counsel to the convoy. With respect to sort of everyone's given an overview of the theory of their case, it is our view that there was no justification whatsoever to invoke the Emergencies Act. The Emergencies Act requires several things. One, it could be invoked due to espionage and sabotage. Are you going to hear any evidence about espionage and sabotage? The answer to that is no. Two, it could be invoked on the basis of clandestine or deceptive foreign influence, a foreign influence that involves a threat to a person. Are you going to hear evidence about that? The answer to that is no. It also could be invoked on the basis of threats or use of acts of serious violence against persons or property. Are you going to hear evidence of violence against persons or property? The answer is no. Lastly, it can also be invoked if there is a group or persons trying to destroy or overthrow by violence the system of government of Canada. Are you going to hear evidence about individuals trying to do that? The answer is no. And the answer is that there was no reasonable and probable grounds to invoke the Emergencies Act, and that the government exceeded their jurisdiction, both constitutionally and legislatively, in doing so. Thank you.
Hear, hear. I would agree with every single word there. Yes, Brendan, thank you very much. So also to clarify some confusion that happened in the chat is, what is the results we can expect from this? Is somebody going to go to jail? Somebody be charged? Not likely at all. What we're going to hopefully get out of this is just a lot more of the information, a lot of the truth, and hopefully we will have well, we're supposed to get a report with recommendations, and I got asked this question on YouTube earlier on what I think the result will be. And I think it's going to be some recommendations around future protests and what can and can't happen. I think what we're going to establish in this is there is going to be a limit on what a legal protest is stemming from this, meaning we should be allowed to protest the government. We should be allowed to show our disdain for their actions, and we should be allowed to demand that they answer us. All of that should be fine. But when it encroaches on civilians who are innocent to this whole thing, and particular things like sound, diesel fumes, access to roads, those impeded the civilians far more than it did the government. So we may find going forward that the recommendations may start to draw a line between who's being affected by the protest, for how long, and whether or not it's reasonable if innocent victims are the result of the protest. I don't think anybody who wants to protest the government truly wants to have innocent victims involved, but that may be the distinction that we're going to have to look at trying to find a way to make, because going forward, we may need to know that. The video can back up, so let me go ahead and load it up here and just get it ready to go. Now, in addition to those, the government's going to have some sort of recommendations where they overstepped, because there's no question in my mind that they did overstep tremendously too. So even if we get additional regulations or guidance around what a protest is and who it could affect and whether or not it's a nuisance to the public versus a protest for the government itself still overstepped the boundaries for sure. They shouldn't have had police forces come in, the horses, be so violent against the protesters, the use of the Emergency Act itself, the freezing of the bank accounts, the commandeering of tow truck drivers. All of that is going to come under scrutiny, and I believe the government's going to be harshly recommended not to do stuff like that again, all the way to the point that we may see an amendment to the Emergency Act. So if you recall, Trudeau Sr. used the War Measures Act incorrectly, and then it got amended and it got renamed. And it got renamed to the Emergencies Act. We may see that again. We may see some more amendments and a renaming of the act that gives the government the supreme power to do basically anything. So that's probably what I think is going to happen. We're going to be recommendations on what a legal protest is versus a civil disobedience that impedes and impeaches on other people's, right to life and calm and a good life. And there'll be recommendations on the government on what lines were crossed, and probably amendments to the Emergency Act itself, and a renaming of it. Because once they rename it, this is their way of trying to erase the past history. It's why we don't call it the War Measures Act anymore. It's because it will bring up some bad memories of its misuse by Trudeau Sr. So we'll probably have a new act name, some amendments, and ideally some good groundwork for the government never to cross again. But let's be frank, that's what they thought when they did the amendments to the War Measures Act the first time around, and it didn't work the first time it got used. So I'm going to be very interested in seeing where they go with this. Part of the reason why I'm running, because I do believe that I can contribute to the conversations around amendments and other things that the government needs to address and work on. And they don't take our voices, we know that. So one of the ways to get in there, instead of being at the front door pounding and screaming, is to run a campaign, get elected, and get a parking spot in the back parking lot with access card to the back door and an office inside. That would be a wonderful way to get the message in there.
Order, allowed.
Well, there you go. Day 3 in the books. We heard from the city manager and the chief of staff from City of Ottawa. And oh my, there was you didn't need the convoy representative to ruffle feathers and get people upset. They were doing it themselves. So it looks like there's a lot of misunderstanding on the timeline, who said what to who's responsible for what, who was moving trucks when, how many of them were moved. A lot of good questions coming out here. Let me go take a look here. Great job on the stream. Yeah, Dwayne, you know, I'm doing my best here. It's a long day. I'm definitely going to need some electrolytes and some water in me. It's been a long day, but absolutely intriguing. And this is just day 3, folks. We're about 10% of the way through. So this will be a marathon for sure. And there'll be a lot of great days coming up, especially tomorrow. So tomorrow is Mayor Jim Watson. I suspect we're going to see a lot of him throughout the day. We spent the whole day listening to his staff, and now we're going to spend some time listening to him. There was some contradictions in the understanding, especially with, and let me get his name, or not his name, but who he's from. The residents, the Ottawa Business and Community Association, the residents that were being represented. He was really trying to establish that the city was not in control, and the city was unable to use bylaw enforcement or any of the other tools that the city has in order to maybe establish that the businesses and residents were under a lot more challenges than they actually were. So we saw some pushback, and we saw some correction of the record, and I was very impressed with that last witness. I don't know why he wanted to do it in French at the beginning, but he did switch to English, and I'm thankful for that, because it likely would have run even longer. Again, okay, let's see what we got here for some more comments. Yeah, absolutely, Donald. I'm 100% with you on this. We have seen nothing close to allowing, well, the Emergency Act, the aka the War Measures Act, because again, as you know, Donald, you're an ex-police officer, there cannot be any existing laws that can help them deal with the situation. And if there are existing laws, then the Emergency Act is not even an option. And what we're hearing so far, even at the end there, that it was pretty clear that trucks were being moved, streets were being emptied out, and it was come along. But at some point, there was a decision made that maybe it wasn't going fast enough, or maybe they weren't getting enough commitments or confirmation. But in either case, that City of Ottawa lawyer presented a lot of pictures of empty streets. So I found that to be very interesting. And then at the end of the testimony this morning, the very last closing comment he made was that the city did not try and do any injunctions. That was an important comment. The very last statement he made, very last admission he made, that the city did not try and do any injunctions. That's key, because once again, you have to exhaust all available laws and options before the Emergency Act. So right there, the city said they still had the legal option of injunctions, and they didn't pursue it. So that's likely going to come up again in the future as to why they didn't do that, possibly tomorrow. And what I did like was Brendan Miller. He was quick, to the point, and he really only had one mission. And that one mission was to confirm and put on the record that the deal was not broken by the convoy. They were moving ahead with the agreement to move trucks out of the residential area and consolidate them into the downtown core. And he easily and rightfully established that there were willing parties to the agreement and continuing to do their part. So I'm very excited about tomorrow. I'm going to get a lot of sleep tonight because we've got to be on top of this one. Mayor Jim is an elected official, so he's going to be making sure that he's giving us all the information that's right, but he's also got a job in an election to look out for. And it sounds like, and I didn't know this before, but Councillor McKinney is a rival. So when we were watching day 2 with her, they were painting quite the picture of failure amongst the council, a split council. They were talking a lot about failure with decision-making and various levels of government. So I find it interesting, and maybe she's running for mayor, and maybe she has an agenda. Great. Oh, great. We'll see you tomorrow, Donald. And I hope you get better, my friend. Maybe you can come and join the stream. I would love to hear from you because I believe a witness, we may be going into the police tomorrow as well. Yeah, so Jim Watson is going to be the first witness, and Diane Deans from the city of Ottawa will be after him. And then we're going to be into Patricia Ferguson from the Ottawa Police Service. So Donald, if you're around, we might get into police witness Wednesday. It might happen. So if you're feeling better and you get your vitamin C in you, maybe you can come chat with us about some of the in and outs of police work and whether or not things make sense to you, and you can share that with us. Oh, you should. Yeah, Prairie. There's a few good ones in there. And this is why I'm not talking over the videos. My original plan was to do more like Rikita Law, where they're, responding over top of the testimony and stuff like that. But very quickly in day 1, I found it was too distracting for myself and the audience. So I'll be very quiet and I'll do my chatting, but that should help you be able to go back and then rewatch it without interruption. So enjoy that. I used the old name. Oh, to remind everybody of where the law does. Yeah, absolutely. Because when they changed their name, they kind of softened its purpose by calling it Emergency Act. Now we are seeing the ramifications of that, because what is an emergency? Maybe we should ask Matt Walsh to write a book. What is an emergency? And we might get the answer. But yeah, you're right, Donald. So that's a great thing to do. Yeah, I understand. Reusing that old term to remind everybody that this is really designed for laws, for war, not for protest of Canadians who don't like something. Vitamin C, Jack Daniels. Yeah. Whatever it does, buddy. So yeah, see if you can come by tomorrow, get on the stream, or maybe try for Wednesday. I think people would love to hear from you. Talks the trucks. Sure. Yeah. No, see, the truckers were quite coordinated, and they were using traditional technology, radios and stuff like that. Throw it in the comments in the chat if you are kind of surprised to hear how disorganized the nation's capital is on the municipal level when it comes to running their city. I am surprised. I'm surprised to hear some of the admissions on how they have a lack of communication and coordination. That's surprising to me. You would think we would certainly have some of the best in the nation's capital, but that may not be the case. Or maybe our expectations for our leaders are a little bit too high. But if they need to rely upon things like the War Measure Act to deal with protests, maybe we should be putting in some different leaders. Maybe we should be holding them more accountable. And also maybe we should try and visit the idea of some sort of way of limiting the terms of staff, because people who are in there running a ship are actually the non-elected officials. The elected officials come in every 4 years or so and change seats. But some of the actual movers and shakers are non-elected. I've seen that in person. I'll save that story for another day. Oh, she definitely does. Sure. What do you got, Dwayne? No, oh, he's not running. Okay, so he's leaving. Okay, and she is running. This will cost her for sure. Yeah, I think she embarrassed herself on Friday. Especially in all that coaching and coaxing she was doing. For example, the hot mic caught her telling him to respond in French, and then caught her saying, ooh, that's mean, when Brendan Miller asked if he would like a headset, because he's the one who said, Councillor Fleury said, my English is not so good and I might need to speak in French. So you heard her on the hot mic making some comments. So she has an ambition, she has a motive, she has an agenda. It's pretty clear. Oh, apologies. They have a motive, they have an agenda, and they have a mission. I actually want to be careful about that because I don't want any reason to have my stream taken down. And they did make it very clear during testimony that these pronouns are they and they. So I want to be careful with that, because in Canada that actually is a law. And unfortunately, I do have to be careful with that. Going to check for too long. You bet. Independent oversight. I'm going to toot that one a little bit more. We have the ability to have independent oversight in the Parliament, but we don't use it. We use the independent label as a step down or demotion from a party, when independent was built into the system to provide non-party based oversight. This is what we're missing in Canada. We've been missing it for way too long. We need to put some real independence in there, so that we can make sure that somebody's holding them accountable, because in our current system, the government holds himself accountable. And as we're seeing right now, that may not be a good way to go about it. Not shocking, you bet, Dwayne, for sure. It's up to us to keep an eye on them. There we go, Prairie. That's exactly what I mean. And that's why non-party affiliated is probably some of the better options when it comes to an MP. I'm not suggesting we get rid of parties and everybody's independent. I'm suggesting you put some in. Zero is not a good idea. So a couple of province, a couple independents per province would definitely be a good way to add some accountability to the system. And by the way, we don't have to change a law. Independent is a position in Parliament, so we just don't utilize it. But it kind of, yeah, that's right, because they got to call it on themselves. Now, Trudeau has gotten into trouble a little bit in the scandal around the We charity. So even with his own government in charge of holding them accountable, there's been a couple times where he's even gone too far for them. I don't believe they're going to fully hold him accountable for any of this, even if the inquiry comes back and says it was unjustified, because I believe he's just going to blame it on bad information and bad intelligence that he received. But in any case, I think if you really want to hold Justin accountable, again, the 45th Parliament, let's get some new people in there, and we'll have some more investigations. And if you have people like me in there, I won't stop until we get answers. They're going to find me very distracting and very frustrating, because I'm not somebody that can just go away and there's no party whip. So consider throwing an independent or two in there. I would agree. So Prairie, I hope you mean vote me in. So if you're in Yellowhead, I'm running for your region. So go ahead and look me up, say hi, ask me questions. I want to chat. There's a dozen different ways to get a hold of me. So if you want to say hi, I'd love to hear from you. And to the rest of Alberta, we've got a big job to do. I believe Canada is looking at us to kind of stand up. Saskatchewan, Manitoba, even BC is kind of waiting on us to see what we're going to do. So I'm looking forward to seeing what we do for the next 12 months when it comes to sovereignty, rights, freedoms, charter. We've got a lot of questions to answer in the next little bit. So it'll be interesting to see where we go with that. Bad science. He trusts the science. Well, are you referring to Mr. Fauci? Because isn't he the science? And does that mean science retires at the end of this year? So what are we going to do after that? Well, I'm going to wrap up on that. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm now going on to 9 hours and 56 minutes. I'm going to do my best to try and put together some summaries. These are long days. There's a lot going on. So what I'm going to try and do is do verbal summaries during the videos, and then I will consolidate those into a shorter video. But let me know how that goes. And if we can find another way to do these summaries quicker, I'd be down for it. And if there's anybody out there that likes to do video editing and wants to get behind and help me out, reach out. I'm happy to work with people. One more comment from Prairie in Manitoba. Thanks for having me today. Prairie, thank you very much. Fond memories of Manitoba. I did my junior high days there and high school days there. So Fort Richmond, that was my collegiate. And to everybody in FRC, go Eagles and have a great time. So good night, everybody. Have yourself a great day. Get a lot of rest. And if you're going to be around on the stream tomorrow, I'm going to be starting at 9 a.m. Eastern time. And we'll do the 30 minutes of have some coffee, get to know each other. And then we're going to go see Mayor Jim Monson. So good night, everybody. Have yourself a great day. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends, because the more people we can reach, the more information can be out there and less confusion, and then people can make up their own mind. That's the purpose of the inquiry, is to educate the public, not necessarily decide on fault, but to educate the public. So have a great night. Take care, and we'll see you in the morning. Bye-bye. And if you like this video, remember to like and subscribe and press that notification button to receive more information like this. You can also follow me at yellowhead.vote to stay informed and get the inside scoop. Thank you.